I'm always very grateful to people who leave comments, and most of the time I notice who it is. And today I made a note and I didn't notice who it was, but somebody has observed quite rightly that even if there were Ukrainian drones in the vicinity of Grozny airport, number one, Russia had a duty to close down the airport, and number two, it was able to track these drones by radar, or at least it had some advance warning, and it should have stopped aviation in the immediate vicinity. The the further issue about the anti-aircraft, the defense attack system is a secondary matter. So the tragic downing of the Azerbaijan airlines near Grozny on Christmas Day, which killed 38 people, is a sobering reminder of the dangers of unresolved political tension and global activity. And the incident raises crucial questions about Russia's responsibilities and failures. And while President Putin has expressed condolences, he's avoided taking direct responsibility, leaving many unanswered questions and demonstrating that rather than manning up, he is basically a coward, as indeed is the regime that supports him. And I use the term him very loosely. He's refused to accept direct responsibility. And I look into these 5 points that one of the that was left on one of the comments, and explore that as much as I can, because it underscores why Russia should shoulder responsibility for the disaster, even if Ukrainian drones were active in the region. So we need to critically evaluate the evidence and the circumstances surrounding this tragedy. Firstly, Russia's radar coverage would have offered some sort of forewarning, and the forewarning was ignored, demonstrating again the arrogance of the Kremlin and the people who work on the Kremlin's behalf, the various local government authorities, the organizations that man the local airports and so on. Because it's all part of a spider's web. You don't achieve any position in Russia, even in a university, without the say-so of the authorities in the Kremlin. I remember particularly the senior positions in the university that I worked in were all approved directly by the Kremlin. And when there was a problem, the Kremlin sent in the husband, I think, of the Minister of Education to take over. Everything is a political appointment. So it's very important to understand that, in understanding the control and therefore the responsibility that the Kremlin must shoulder for what goes on even in Grozny. Russia possesses, in addition, one of the most advanced radar systems in the world, covering its airspace and beyond. So foreknowledge of drone activity, although Russia may not be able to take down the drones, it would have known that drones were coming in, and reports confirm Ukrainian drones have targeted Grozny in the past and other strategic locations in weeks prior. So Russia's radar systems would have detected these incursions and identified potential threats. The fact that there is no evidence of drone activity on that particular day doesn't automatically rule it out, but it does suggest that there was a casualness about the threat, and a reliance instead on these defense systems which kicked in automatically, it seems. Despite this, Russia failed to act decisively to mitigate any risk to civilian air traffic, and radar coverage deep within Russia, especially near sensitive sites like Grozny, should have enabled authorities to foresee potential risks to civilian flights. And you should compare this with the MH17 attack, where Russian-backed separatists misidentified a civilian plane as a threat. It indicates a pattern of negligence or incompetence on the part of the Russian authorities in differentiating between military and civilian aircraft. That's point one. Point two is the failure to close airspace or to limit civilian flights where there are credible risks. and the closure of airspace would then be standard protocol. Russia has a responsibility to do this, and given their knowledge of Ukrainian drone operations, Russia had a duty to close Grozny's airspace and its surrounding airspace if they detected Ukrainian drones in the vicinity. So they can't blame Ukrainian drones if they haven't closed their airspace. So to blame Ukrainian drones is to transfer responsibility from the Russian authorities where it belongs onto the Ukrainian authorities where it doesn't belong, frankly. And even if there were Ukrainian drones, it's still Russia's responsibility to close airspace or limit civilian flights. This is about neglect of safety measures and a failure to limit civilian flights in an active conflict zone. It represents gross negligence by Russia. By allowing flights to continue, Russia prioritized convenience over safety. And Israel routinely closes its airspace during times of heightened threat, even for minor rocket attacks. Russia's failure to do the same speaks volumes about its arrogance, its risk management practices, and its stupidity. It goes back to the Kremlin. The third point is the lack of adequate flight redirection. If airspace closure was considered unnecessary, redirecting civilian flights to safer airports was the next logical step. And the Azerbaijan Airlines flight was not adequately redirected. Russian aviation authorities allegedly allowed the flight to proceed on a route perilously close to military operations, and it was then misdirected across or over the Caspian Sea. Reports suggested that after the plane had been hit, Russian controllers directed it over the Caspian Sea. Seemingly, various commentators have suggested in an attempt to obscure evidence, hoping that the plane and the passengers on the plane, the 38 who survived, would die, would crash. It raises ethical and legal questions about Russia's intentions. And as I say, it goes back to the Kremlin because of these appointments that are managed in a centralized system. The pilot heroism needs to be called out. And Putin didn't do that. It's all about him. Me, as if he actually exists still. No, he should have called out the heroism of the pilots, but he didn't. Because he's not interested in that. He's only interested in the sanctity and the salvation of the regime, the Kremlin. The Kremlin is everything. Despite the challenges that the plane faced, the pilots managed to bring the plane down in Kazakhstan, saving lives, and this tragedy could have been worse without their efforts. The fourth point, the evidence of Russian anti-aircraft involvement. This is the most damning evidence, it implicates a Russian surface-to-air missile system, an SAM system. And shrapnel marks on the fuselage apparently are consistent with missile impacts, not a mechanical failure or a bird strike, as the Kremlin initially claimed, without even seeing the close-up evidence of the fuselage itself. It was already there with an excuse, and survivors' accounts of hearing explosions corroborate the theory, apparently. The global implications of this, while Russia claims that the systems were on automatic, the responsibility still lies with the operator to ensure such systems are calibrated to avoid civilian casualties. And again, the incident evokes memories of other mistakes like this, like the Iranian military's accidental downing of the Ukraine international flights 752 in 2020. In both cases, military systems were misused or mismanaged. The fifth point is the aftermath and the shifting of the blame. And this is about diplomatic apologies without ownership. And President Putin's apology to Azerbaijan avoids admitting fault, framing the incident as a tragic mistake. This tactic aims to preserve relationships with Azerbaijan while deflecting blame, and at the same time to duck legal responsibility. The blame game is something which is important here. Russia has subtly hinted at Ukrainian involvement by citing drone activity in the region. However, there's no concrete evidence at all that links Ukrainian drones to this specific event, or indeed that Ukrainian drones were there. And if they were, it's Russia's responsibility to stop civilian aircraft. Azerbaijan's reaction is interesting. It's called for a full investigation, but Russia's exclusion from leading the inquiry signals mistrust. This lack of transparency only fuels suspicions. The tragedy was entirely avoidable. Russia's failures, ignoring the radar intelligence, not closing airspace, the inadequate flight redirection, and the apparent misuse of anti-aircraft missile systems underscore a pattern of culpable negligence. Even if Ukrainian drones were present, the ultimate responsibility lies with Russia to safeguard civilian lives in its airspace. The downing of the Azerbaijan Airlines flight is not just an aviation disaster, it's a stark reminder of the dangers posed by unresolved global conflict and the human cost of military miscalculations and the spread of this web of evil from the Kremlin. It's imperative that the international community demands accountability and transparency and immediately offers support to Azerbaijan and to Kazakhstan, ensuring that such tragedies are never repeated.